The skill we are looking at today is whether you know and recognize some of the literary conventions in the text we are looking at this week. Now, I know convention sounds like a very complicated word, but basically conventions are a set of key features that appear in a range of similar texts. So we're going to look at A Journey for Hope and see if we can recognize these key features that we may see repeated in similar books. Our story is A Journey for Hope, and first I wanted to look at the two different types of texts we have and have a good think where our story might belong. So we have fiction text and non-fiction text with some examples that belong to each. Have a good think about where our story should go. If you said fiction, you would be right. A Journey for Hope is a story. It describes events that are not real. It does not contain information or instructions or maps. It is a story made up by some of the children at English Martyrs. Now, let's have a look at fiction more closely. These are some different examples of fiction stories. Fairy tales, traditional tales, myths, legends, science fiction, my favorite, fantasy, mystery, horror, a play, quest story, adventure story, or a historical story. Now, don't confuse historical with historical facts. This is a story based on a particular time in history. Have a good think again about where The Journey for Hope might belong. At this stage, I want you to bear in mind that some of these types of stories overlap. So what we know as a fairy tale might also be a traditional tale. Myths and legends are very close together. Science fiction could also be a fantasy story. Mystery may contain horror. Adventure may include a quest. What do you think A Journey for Hope is? Well, it is true our four friends are going on an adventure on their bike, aren't they? So we will say it is an adventure story. However, they are on a bit of a mission, aren't they? So I would also say they are on a quest. They're trying to achieve an objective, a goal. Our story, A Journey for Hope, is an adventure story with an element of a quest in it. Now, adventure stories are one of the oldest type of stories we have. You could go back to the ancient Greeks and earlier in time and find this type of story. They're very exciting and we have lots of examples of them around us. Think of the Gruffalo, think of Star Wars, think of Pokemon, think of Doctor Who. They are everywhere. Now, I want to look at the conventions of adventure stories. And what I'm going to do to make this easier, I'm going to look at three different aspects of the story. I'm going to look at characters. I'm going to look at the plot. And I'm going to look at the setting. Now, the characters are who or what has the action in our story, performs that action. The plot is the sequence of events that drive the story in our text. And the setting is when or where our story takes place. Let's look at those more closely. Now, in every story, we have two types of characters. We have our heroes, which are the good guys, and we have the enemies, or the bad guys. Now, you might be thinking, oh, I don't remember any bad guys in the Journey for Hope. So I want you to think about this one. Think about who the bad guys might be here while we look at our heroes, our good guys. So who are the main characters in our story? Well, they're right there. It's the python, the meerkat, the hedgehog, and the hissing cockroach. So every story has characters. Now, as our characters go on their adventure, they can't do it just by themselves. Eventually, they will need help from somebody else. Can you think who that is in our story? It's the children. The children will give our heroes the help they need to finish their quest or complete their adventure. Now, remember when I said in every story we need heroes and enemies? This is essential because the battle, the fight between heroes and enemies creates tension in our story and drives the plot. So have you had a good think about who the enemy is in our story? It's not quite a person, even though people are hidden behind those. Do you remember what our characters encountered on our adventure? They met with water pollution, all these bottles in the sea. They met with trees being chopped down, deforestation. And they faced a lot of traffic in the city, pollution. So all these negative things are our enemies in our story. They're not people, even though people cause them. They're just characters, if you want. Now, our good guys, it doesn't matter how good they are, and heroic and courageous, they are always presented with a flaw. Now, a flaw is like a defect, if you want, something that's a little bit of a minus in their character. They can't be perfect because perfect characters are boring. What is the point of the story if I start with perfect characters? So let's think, what is the flaw of our heroes? Now, the python was a bit grumpy, wasn't he? Grumpy and a bit sleepy. Took him a while to get started in the adventure. The meerkat, it's too excited, so excited. I bet it drove them crazy. The pygmy hedgehog is a bit shy, not sure about himself or herself. And as for the hissing cockroach, well, it just hisses, it can't talk, and it feels small and powerless. So all our characters, as they start their adventure, are feeling unsure about themselves and a little bit powerless. So have a think of other adventure stories you know and see if these conventions apply. I can definitely think of Star Wars, heroes and enemies. I can think of Star Wars, who helps Luke Skywalker. Think of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Who are his opponents? Who goes with Charlie on his adventure to help him? I'm even thinking of Pokemon. I'm thinking of Ash trying to achieve his goal of collecting all the Pokemon. Who works against Ash? Who travels with Ash to help him? And of course, if you are a Hobbit or Lord of the Rings fan, like me, well, you know there's a whole company of characters who help Bilbo with his quest. We're not even going to mention the enemy in The Hobbit. The setting is when or where a story takes place. The when, it could be any time. It could be in the past, it could be in the future, it could be now. You could travel between the past, the future, and the now. We can have multiple settings. It could be a city, it could be a forest, it could be a mythical land. But I want to put this idea to you. I believe there is only one setting in adventure stories. Have a think why that might be. I believe the setting of an adventure story is the road. And by road, I do not mean an actual road. I mean the journey our heroes take. So it could be a road, it could be a path, it could be a river, it could be a journey that incorporates all of them. Our heroes will start at this point. They may go to different places and they will reach their destination. Sometimes the destination is not important. Sometimes it is the journey itself that it's important. Now think of our friends here. They travel with their bike and they're on a road, they go to the sea, they go to the city. But what is important is the journey they undertake. Think of our old friend, John Patrick Norman Mackenzie. Think of the road he took on his way to school. He took the road to learn, and he met different creatures at different points. But at the end of the day, the trip he took, his daily trip to get to school, is important. Think of epic stories. Again, I'll go back to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Our heroes travel through Middle-earth to achieve their goal. And it is true, they go to different places, but the journey is what is important in the story. Can you think of other examples? Think of Harry Potter. It is true he stayed within Hogwarts most of the time, but even within Hogwarts, he would travel to different places. The journey is important for our story. The plot is a sequence of events that describe the story. Even though there is a clear beginning and end, some of these elements can be moved in different places, as we will see in a minute. So first, our heroes must begin their adventure. On the way, early on or a bit later, they will meet some people to help them. Now, in our story, this happens later on. In other stories, this will happen right at the beginning. So again, thinking of Harry Potter, think when Harry meets his friends. Charlie and Charlie in the Factory, if we think of Grandad as the person who helps him, that happens earlier on in the story. Doctor Who has sometimes companions from the beginning of the story, or he has to go and find his companions. It depends. I'll put their helpers over there. Our heroes embark on the journey. Now, this journey may have different stages. Our characters here move through different locations. What you may want to use is repetition to drive into your story all the obstacles your heroes meet. So even though our characters find different things, they find pollution, they find bottles, they find trees being cut down, they're all obstacles, they're all things that make them very sad. And that leads on to the next stage, which is frustration. The more elements you add here on the journey, the higher the frustration builds. Our characters are feeling helpless. I'm thinking of the legend of King Arthur and his knights. Think of all the obstacles a knight has to face to reach his goal. So as these stages happen, one problem, second problem, third problem, which is the minimum you need, but the more you add, the angrier and more helpless our characters get. Now, in our story, this is where they will meet their helpers. As the frustration builds up, it will reach a climax. If you think of it like a mountain, this is when they'll reach the top, and it's the final obstacle. With the help of their friends, they might be able to solve the problem, or something will happen, something dramatic will happen to help them overcome their problems. And then, ta-da! Their goal is achieved. Again, thinking of our story, by meeting the children, they found a solution to the pollution problems. Is achieving the goal enough in a story? Is that where our story ends? Not usually. Something else happens after this. The goal is achieved, but we have a transformation. Nothing magical. It just means something happens to our characters. Now, if I take you back to our heroes, if you remember, our heroes were flawed at the beginning of the journey. Let's see if you can see this better. The beginning of our journey, our heroes were flawed. They were grumpy, they were hissing, they were rather excited. By the end of the journey, they change. They are not flawed anymore. They may still not be perfect, but their feelings have changed. Now think how our characters started in the story, a bit helpless and unsure of themselves. By the time they reach the end, they are positive. They view the world with optimism. And I want you to think again of this word goal. In the beginning of the story, what did our heroes try to achieve? Did they start their journey wanting to save the planet? They didn't. They just wanted to go sightseeing. They just wanted to see the world. As their journey progressed, the goal they achieved was different to the goal they had in mind. By the time they reached their journey, their goal had become to make the planet or make the Earth a better place. And this they have begun to achieve. That is the transformation of your characters. We've talked a bit about the structure of the story. Now I want to talk to you a bit about language and the language conventions we have in stories like this. And this will help you with your writing. Now, a long journey requires descriptive language. So we have a lot of description. Now think what you could use to make this description. Adjectives, expanded noun phrases, really powerful vocabulary. We have dialogue. Remember, our characters need to talk to each other or talk to the people who will help them. So remember your direct speech punctuation there. The dialogue will have to be interesting, not just he said, she said, he said, she said. Find ways to make it as real as possible. Now, the action in our story at some point will need to be fast-paced. You need a sense of urgency. What kind of sentences would you use for that? Do you think long expanded sentences have a fast pace? They don't. You will need short, snappy sentences, simple sentences, driving the action quickly. Now, our characters get frustrated by the obstacles they meet. They may be in a bit of a dark mood. Again, what grammatical features do you think we could use? Do you think adverbs will come useful here? Gloomily, frustratingly, happily. And at the end of a story, there is change. How would the author describe the change? How would you describe the change? How would you do a before and after description? Think of your fronted adverbials. Think of adverbials that describe time or manner. And there you have it. These are the conventions of an adventure or a quest story. Have a good look at them and think of other adventure stories you know and see if you can follow the elements that we have identified here. Think of John Patrick Norman Mackenzie. Think of Harry Potter. Think of Luke Skywalker and Star Wars. Think of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Think of the Gruffalo. Think of your own story that you will write one day. Can you follow these elements here? I can't wait to read your own stories.